Guiding Light, presented by Comet, the stain-removing cleanser.
By mid-1949, Ernest shows were in demand for this new thing called television.
Yes? Who is it?
Erna was moving to California for a while, and she wanted Agnes to join her. Living in her father's home was increasingly difficult for Agnes. He wasn't happy about his daughter's new career. Agnes decided it was time for a big change.
I wanted to be in television, but I didn't want to go to California. I wanted to come to New York. Believe it or not, I'd never been to New York. And so, it's little Hicks from Tennessee. And so I came to New York.
Coming up, 22-year-old Agnes knew no one in the big city. She was bound to be lonely. She wondered if she would make friends or meet a nice man. Agnes could write soap opera romance, but could she find the real thing in real life? New York City in 1950 was the center of the golden age of television, a creatively rich time for talented writers. Within a month of hitting the big city, Agnes sold a script for a whopping $750. Problem was, nothing that exciting was happening in her social life.
On a summer evening, I'd be in our little backyard, and I would hear this laughter and tinkling of glasses at the cocktail hour, and I was so lonely.
Television back then was live. No videotape, no retakes. Agnes had to learn new tricks of the trade, but soon she was a name writer with the publicity to prove it. She even made enough money to treat herself to a European trip. In late 1950, Agnes got a call from someone named Bob Nixon. He told her that some mutual friends thought they should meet.
Oh, I know that my godmother set them up, and that she showed my father a picture of my mother, and he said, she's the coldest looking fish I've ever seen.
Nevertheless, the young Chrysler executive drove from his home in Washington, D.C. to spend a weekend in New York with the cold fish. It was Christmas time, so Agnes and Bob went to a department store.
And when we were going up the escalator, there were a lot of kids there on the escalator because they were going to see Santa Claus. And so he started talking to them. You're going to see Santa Claus? What are you going to ask for? What do you want? And that really touched me. I thought, isn't that nice? And I guess back in the back of my mind was the thought he'd be a really good father.
Bob's marriage proposal was more silly than soap opera.
He met me at the airport, and he had a hat box. And he said, here. And I said, what is that? And he said, it's a hat. And I said, for me? He said, yes. You said you would marry the man who bought you a hat. I don't remember. I think he dreamt it. To this day, I think he dreamt it. But here was his hat. It was awful. It was the ugliest hat. It felt like a toreador's hat with a big veil hanging down. I wore it once, I think.
Agnes accepted Bob's proposal on one condition, that he'd never expect her to give up writing. He readily agreed. Agnes and Bob were married in April of 1951, only 4 months after their first date. Agnes's parents came to New York for the wedding.
You know, it was uncomfortable. He came in, and my mother said, hello, Mr. Eckhart, and he said, hello, Mrs. Eckhart.
Bob's company transferred the newlyweds to Philadelphia. His bride wasted no time meeting her goals, to start a family and to continue working. 2 months after the wedding, Agnes was writing for the popular soap called
Search for Tomorrow.
And she was pregnant. Agnes began writing at home and mailing her scripts to New York. Before the baby was born, Agnes and Bob took a trip to see both her mother and her father. Predictably, the visit with her father turned sour.
Immediately, the fact that I went to Tennessee negated the benefit of my coming to Chicago. We had some horrible fight. God knows what it was. Not with Bob present. Just as I was leaving, funny, I had come to say goodbye. Bob was waiting for me downstairs. He never contacted me after that. Aunt Hazel said he would put our pictures out, the 4 grandchildren, and cry. And yet he wouldn't contact Mom, and she would very nicely send an announcement with each one. I think this one looks like you, Dad. He got something in his mind that they weren't going to have in contact with each other. So he lost out big time.
Shortly after the birth of Agnes's second daughter, Erna Phillips called, asking Agnes to write for the TV version of The Guiding Light, one of Erna's earliest successes on radio. Agnes happily accepted.
Julie isn't in her 6th month, as we've been saying. She's in her 8th month.
Bert, I'm really not surprised.
You mean you guessed Julie was pregnant before she and Michael were married?
Agnes continued to juggle diapers and deadlines. The score was 4 babies in 5 years and 2 soap operas. The Guiding Light, plus a new show Agnes and Erna created together. As the world turns, nothing got in the way of Agnes's work commitments, not even giving birth.
I had very long labors with my children, and I took my dictaphone to the hospital with me. And it was in a little suitcase, and a nurse came in and said, "Oh, you haven't been unpacked," and she expected to find little booties and things there for baby apparel, and opened it, and it was this kind of steely dictaphone that was sitting there that I used.
The growing family needed growing room, so the Nixons bought Pine Cottage, a 3-story in Philadelphia, built before the Revolutionary War. Bob kept his proposal promise to support Agnes's career, which meant being hands-on with the children. Agnes wrote wherever and whenever she could, even on family vacations.
To write is really hard, and it usually takes people like little habits to get into a story, and she's able to just go up there and go from, right away. And that's an amazing gift that she has, doing that.
In the late 1950s, Agnes accepted an enormous responsibility to take over Erna's job as head writer of The Guiding Light. Instead of the usual love stuff, Agnes now wanted viewers to be informed. She came up with a story idea for the popular character, Berta Bauer, whose life could be saved by a relatively new procedure called a pap test.
Well, there's your morning paper, and everything's all ready for you to sit down.
Who's coming to
The network and the sponsor balked, saying the subject was too intimate for television.
Sounds great.
Agnes stood firm, and the storyline was finally okayed on the condition that Agnes not use 3 words: cancer, uterus, and hysterectomy.
When do you go to the hospital?
Oh, tomorrow or the next day. They'll let me know when a room is available.
It was not to try to break barriers or anything like that, but I just thought this is insane to say that entertainment and public service can never be in the same story.
Agnes proved that the audience embraced reality as much as romance. By 1965, with her reputation firmly established, Agnes was asked to rescue the ratings of yet another show, Another World. She did so, in part, by creating a troublemaking character named Rachel.
It was like the Bickersons. And she was beautiful and willful, and people loved her.
Vixens had been done before on soaps, but there was never one quite like this. Agnes got a kick out of creating a sexy, self-absorbed seductress like Rachel. But 5 years later, on a different show, Agnes would create another vixen, one destined to be even more memorable.
I'm going to be just what he bargained for.